You are tuned in to the Monday Night Carlo, Sports and Entertainment Sportscast. And now, without further ado, I give to you the one and only Carlo.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Monday Night Carlo. This is going to be fun, just like the Beach Boys once said. And today I'm speaking to none other than Ed Weigle, who's been the voice of America for 30-plus years, just coming up around the corner. But before I do that, let me tell you about the ways you can catch MNC Podcast via social media. You can do so on Twitter, at MNC Podcast, Instagram, Monday Night Carlo, Facebook as well. Do not forget the Facebook, facebook.com/MNC Podcast. But as I said, I'm very excited tonight. It should be a good chat. He's a good man. His name's Ed Weigle. He's a voiceover artist, and he's with me right now. Ed, how you doing?
I could be just totally boring, too, you know.
I very much doubt that.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And by the way, I really enjoyed the show that you did recently with my good friend Marc Silk.
Yes, I was going to ask you about your relationship with Marc, because it's because of Marc we hooked up as well. So tell me a little bit about you and Marc.
Wow. I had taken out an ad in the back pages of R&R, Radio and Records magazine, which is no more, sadly.
Okay.
And it was I was pitching myself as an imaging voice for radio stations. And imaging voice is the guy that says, "This is Soundwave 96.4." You do the station IDs and the promos.
Yes.
And Marc, somehow we hooked up through that. And then he actually started to basically represent me to other radio stations over in the UK. I think we must have had about 15 stations going at one time.
Really?
Because they would go on the air with something, they would try it. If it worked, fine. They would keep it. If it didn't, then they'd move on to something else.
Yes.
And I would voice it. He would produce it. He's an extraordinary producer,
yes,
as well as probably the most talented voice actor I've ever met. I can't do what he does. Very few people can, or at least do it well as he can.
Yes.
And so that's how we met. And I remember we were working on quite a few radio stations. And one day he sent me a picture of him with another fellow. And I said, "Well, hell, that looks like George Lucas." He said, "It is."
Yes.
He said, "I'm supposed to do," I think originally it was going to be two voices,
yes,
for the Phantom Menace, and he ended up doing Oxmo, the one.
That's right.
And so after that, his career just went zoom, and he was already very well known as England's man of 1,000 voices, even at that time. But I am exceptionally proud of him. He's all over everything. My son, my soon-to-be 9-year-old son, even hears him on some of his cartoons that he watches over here in the U.S.
Yes. So let's talk about you, Ed. Let's go on this crazy journey of Ed Weigle. Tell me how did you start in the voice game?
Oh my, it's hard to believe. Next month it's going to be 36 years since I did my first paid gig at the age of 13. I was in junior high school, and there was a teacher there who I believe he must have heard me on the school PA system.
Right.
And he had a good friend who ran a video production house. He specialized in what we call industrials. They were kind of, you'll take a tour of the establishment and see what they do and how they do it. In this case, it was a video about a steel rolling plant in where I went to school, Latrobe, Pennsylvania,
right,
which is a fine little city. We also turned out it was the birthplace of American football, Mr. Rogers, Arnie Palmer, and the world's first banana split.
Nice.
Came from a tiny spot on the map. But there was a dwindling industry. It was, taking its last gasp, and they had me narrate something about the rolling mill. And I wish I had a copy of it. Actually, I don't, because sometimes you hear your old stuff and it's like looking at old bad pictures.
That's funny you say that, because Marc said exactly the same thing, like almost like he was embarrassed about it as well.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. I can hear something that I did yesterday, and I'm like, why the hell did I say that way? And I'll go back and I'll actually do it if time permits. And if you get 90% satisfaction out of what you do, I mean, I think you're doing very well.
So I know that you are a voice of many kind of movie trailers and things like that. What was your kind of first gig in movies, as it were?
Well, I wish I could do some much bigger things. I've recently done some work for Cartoon Network.
Nice.
I've done stuff for Nickelodeon UK for my friend David Kangas, who's a producer there. Different television show narrations and promos and whatnot. I wish I could do more. But that's pretty much what they call me to do, because my voice is it's really not a popular voice in the grand scheme of things. Many years ago on radio, everybody had a voice like mine. But now we're kind of the novelty. They'll call me to do some of the over-the-top stuff and some of the, get ready for Monday Night Raw. And, there's some of that kind of delivery, which, I'll take what I can get, but I'd like to get a Coca-Cola or a major sponsorship like that. But the trend in the industry for, better part of 40 years has been to pull in the everyman character.
Yes.
The guy who sounds like he just walked in off the street. And that's not to diminish that talent, because to do that, to be totally natural like that, this business is not easy.
No.
But the proliferation right now of so many great-sounding microphones for a relatively cheap price, usually made in China, and in some cases free editing software.
Yes.
You've got a lot of people who really don't belong in this business, who just decide, well, they were selling shoes yesterday, then they went to the grocery store and the clerk said, you have a nice voice. So they go out, buy a microphone, get the editing software, hang up a shingle and say, I'm a voice actor.
I think that one thing that you've got to be proud of is that I know that you're the voice of WWE, or one of the many voices, but definitely when it comes to radio and sports, you must be proud of that, Ed. How did you get involved with WWE?
It's certainly the highlight of my career. With WWE, I should first say that I only do the radio spots.
Yes.
The TV is done out of New York, and a lot of times the great voice that you hear is a fellow by the name of John Gary, and he's just superb. He does a lot of the big movie trailers that I would like to have. So I got involved with WWE, years ago, 1995. I replaced a fellow by the name of Nick Summers. And Nick used to do a lot of concert spots and monster truck spots, and you couldn't turn on the tap without hearing Nick Summers' voice. Okay. But he was with a company called Tour Design in Indianapolis. And he was moving his young family down here to Florida, where I live. And he was charged with finding his own replacement. And I was that replacement. Right. So he and I became, fast friends, good friends. We'd always admired each other's work, and we wanted maybe to pool our resources ultimately. So 6 years later, that happened. He moved down to Florida, and I was back in Indianapolis. I had moved. I moved all over the place. And I was running 2 radio stations in Indianapolis, and he called me and he said, listen, the guy that we have doing these things, he isn't really working out. And he said, I can't do all this. I want to go after some more concert tours like Celine Dion, who we still work with. I think he was going after Barry Manilow, Bette Midler, and I forget who all. But that used to be Nick's thing. He did, AC/DC, Paul McCartney, you name it. So he was trying to get back into that. And I said, well, I'm running 2 radio stations here in downtown Indianapolis, ironically, in the same offices where Tour Design started years before. I've just remembered that little tidbit of information. So anyway, I said, well, listen, I'll help you out. I converted my office into a studio. And when I wasn't running around the station doing operation manager type things, I was in the studio creating WWE radio. Well, as you can imagine, when they have so many shows per year, yes. What is it, some 49 weeks out of the year?
Crazy.
It gets crazy, and it's very demanding. And after a while, he's like, yes, it's got to be one or the other. So I thought, well, he said, we need you down here in Florida. Strangely enough, in the 6 years prior, I never asked Nick, where precisely are you in Florida? Somebody told me he was in Naples, down near Fort Myers someplace, which is about an hour from where I am. And he said, well, we're in Inglewood. I said, you're what? I said, Inglewood is about 15 minutes away from the condo my family's owned since 1974. So needless to say, you didn't have to twist my arm to get me down here at all, in any case, because here's where I wanted to retire. I just got here 30 years earlier than I thought. So I moved into the family condo, and
Nice.
this is it. Like I say, I moved 11 times in 7 years when I was in radio. And so now, my wife gets sick and tired of hearing me say this, but my next move is going to be into a casket or an urn. I'm here.
So talking about, just going slightly back to music, I did some research on you before we talked. Didn't you interview Johnny Cash?
Yeah. Yes, I did. I got a call one afternoon from Lou Robin, who was managing two people, Bill Cosby, who isn't very popular over here right now, and Johnny Cash. And he said, we've heard because I was doing afternoon radio in the Chicago area.
Yes.
And he said, we hear you're a big fan. I said, oh, my God, yeah. He said, how would you like to interview Johnny Cash? I'm like, hell yes, get him on. So I pretty much threw the whole format out the window the next day and taped this interview and ran it in installments. And then I emceed the show that he did in the Chicago area that evening. And he was on the bill with, of course, his wife, the late June Carter Cash.
Yes.
His son, John Cash, and the Carter family, who were just honored by a U.S. postal stamp like a couple of weeks before. So that was quite an interesting country music dynasty that I was able to work with that evening. And they were like almost like my grandparents, the most unpretentious, nice, kind people that you'd ever want to meet. So yeah, that was a thrill.
You're tuned into Monday Night Carlo, the sports pop culture podcast, available on iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher Radio. So why not hit that subscribe button now? Monday Night Carlo, where pop culture fun lives.
So as far as becoming the voice of WWE, or one of the many voices, as you said, who contacted you from WWE? Did you ever get the call from Vince or Linda, or how did you get involved that way?
Nick Summers actually had WWF as a client since 1996.
Oh, okay.
I came in September of 2001. So, in fact, this September it'll be my 15th year. But occasionally I've been in Vince's office. I've been up to Titan Towers, which is the home base in Stamford, Connecticut. And but I've never met Vince. I've corresponded with Stephanie. I've spoken with Paul Levesque, Triple H. Shane McMahon as well, and but mostly I deal with WWE live events. I deal with the promoters who actually promote the shows and get everything rolling, because I really don't have any need to speak with the the upper brass unless they have something that they specifically want me to do or a way that they want me to say it. But basically they'll send me a piece of paper that, and I'm looking at one right now, it just has the promoter's name on it, the venue, the date, the time, and the match, who's going to be there. And it's up to me to put together a 60-second spot, or a radio spot, or a 30-second spot. Because we mostly run 60s over here, although that trend is changing toward 30s, which is, I know what mostly they run there in the UK.
So for you, when you're doing a take of what you have down on paper, how many takes does it take you to nail it, Ed? How many takes do you? I know you've been doing it for a long time. You're probably just going to say one, but how many times do you think to do it again?
It depends on it's so many variables. Living here in Southwest Florida, 365 days out of the year, something is blooming, be it pollen, dust, mold spores, whatever, and it plays hell with my allergies. Right. So you'll notice I'm a little froggy now because I was just out on my lawn watering some trees. But it's the beauty of working from home. So, but anyway, you never know. Some days I'm on it, and other days I'm not, and it's frustrating. But it's always human physical limitations that that get in my way, more so than technical issues. I'm kind of happy to say, a little less expensive.
So as as wrestling goes itself, Ed, are you a fan? When did you become a fan of wrestling?
I was a fan of wrestling probably in my latter high school years, although many years before, when I was a kid. Growing up in the Pittsburgh area, there was a fellow by the name of Bill Cardill, Chilly Billy. And he would host this, was it Saturday or Sunday afternoon wrestling, studio wrestling, where you would see Haystacks Calhoun, Bruno Sammartino, who was from Pittsburgh,
Nice.
and all the big guys of that time. And they would wrestle at Channel 11 Studios. Now, you might know Bill Cardill if you've ever seen either of the movies Night of the Living Dead, either the original 1968 George Romero version
Yes.
or the 1987 version, I think it was, with Tom Savini directing. Bill was the guy who was the news reporter. And Bill just retired last year, in
Nice.
fact. He was a weatherman here. He hosted this fright show called Chiller Theater, and he was known as Chilly Billy, Bill Cardill. And I used to watch that from time to time. And then later, it basically was when we were in college. It was a great opportunity and excuse to get the frat brothers together to drink beer. And we would go to the home of this buddy of mine, frat brother, fellow Sigma Tau Gamma, Joe Rutter, who's now a writer for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. He's a sports writer.
Nice.
And we would go to his house, and we would, grab a keg of beer and watch Vince McMahon and Mean Gene Okerlund on the wrestling. I forget even what it was called now.
Do you have any favorites yourself as growing up as a fan?
Well, I'd have to say my good friend Mean Gene Okerlund.
Nice.
Gino lives probably about 15 minutes from me. My wife Colleen and I, we go and we have drinks with Gene from time to time, and not often enough, I might add.
Nice.
Gene is a dear friend, and it's still kind of surreal sitting there and looking over at this guy that I, basically grew up with. But he's just one of the nicest, funniest, kindest people in the world. We love the guy.
So the Gene, please tell me that the Gene we see on TV and that we love is the Gene that's kind of exactly the same in real life as well.
There's not a heck of a lot of difference.
Really?
It's funny, it's so ironic that he it was called Mean Gene, and I forget who gave him that moniker.
Hulk Hogan, I think.
Who was it?
I think it was Hulk Hogan.
Was it Hulk? I don't know. I'll have to ask him next time I see him. But I thought it was somebody else. But and Hulk is a good friend too. He's a fine person. But anyway, he got that name, and he's just one of the nicest guys. It really doesn't fit him because he's anything but mean.
So was it through wrestling, obviously, that you met Hulk as well? How did you come in contact with Hulk?
Well, Hulk Hogan, actually, he lives in the Tampa area, and I would see him at shows and everything else, and we have some mutual friends. A lady who I know down here, she went to school with him.
Right.
And some of the stories that she's told me, I don't want to repeat, but I mean, but he and I did. We see each other. I was ran into him at Universal Studios in Tampa, in Tampa a couple years ago, and it was kind of weird because I totally forgot that Total Nonstop Action was based there at Universal. So I walk and I held the door. I was back where the actors, because they have something called Halloween Horror Nights, where everybody dresses up and they have all these Halloween festivities. And I was back there with everybody getting ready, and I held the door for some guy. I thought, guy's got clown makeup on. He's probably going to Halloween Horror Nights. It was Sting.
Oh, nice.
When I turned the corner, and there's Terry and a couple of the other, Hulk Hogan and a couple of other wrestlers, and he saw me and was like, "What are you doing here?" But we were up scouting the sound stages. We were supposed to be working on a national TV show, which didn't go through. But we'll keep our fingers crossed. We have some other things in the offering.
25, 30, 30, 37, 50, 60, 60, 70, 70, 80, 90. I'm 100% sure that if you watch Monday Night Carlo, you're going to be in for a treat. You're going to learn a lot of stuff. And thank you, and thank everyone. This is a ringleader.
Did you see any of WrestleMania? What were your thoughts about Mania itself? Did you catch any of WrestleMania?
Yeah, I watched it. I mean, it was impressive. I mean, I can't believe Shane McMahon is probably one of the most gutsy individuals, but Vince always said, I'm not going to have anybody else, take risks like that unless, or he's well, that's how he's going to justify it. If my son does it, you can do it.
I thought, for me, like, being 47 years old, Shane would not take as much risks as he did in his youth, but it seems like he doesn't care. He just he does what the show needs him to do, Ed, you know?
Absolutely. Well, he's driven. He comes from stock like that. I mean, his father is a workaholic by all accounts. I remember when I was up at Titan Towers, the limousine brought me to the company and put me up in a hotel, and they said, now listen, you can call this guy and he'll come pick you up and bring you up to the towers if you want to work out in the gym.
Right.
I'm like, are you out of your mind? I said, first of all, look at me. I worked out a little bit, not anymore. I'm old. But so at the time, I said, are you kidding? I'm not going to embarrass myself by going up there in the gym where somebody like Triple H might walk in. I'm a shrimp by comparison. So no. But it was nice of them to offer.
So do you watch any of NXT, and what are your thoughts on that promotion, that show itself?
Honestly, I don't get a lot of chance to watch things because of my schedule. NXT, yes. I've seen one show that was here in Venice, Florida, where I live, and it was my son's first show that he ever attended. He'll be 9 next month. Nice. And Zach loved it. He was mesmerized, especially by the divas.
No, who isn't, right?
Wow, I thought you're going to be a handful. I just hope he waits a while before he gets his first handful. But yeah, he just loved it, and I'm really impressed by the NXT talent. I mean, we're promoting those shows now, and in fact, I just did 2 or 3 markets today for NXT, and some of the talent I'm seeing come out of there are they're impressing.
Do you hear, like, I'm guessing you hear of talent before, like the general public does as well sometimes?
Well, I don't really know a lot more than the general public, because occasionally I'll know what something is going to be only so I can change the radio.
Yes.
But they keep that very close, to their, they practice the, the word kayfabe.
Yes, yeah.
Sort of the omerta, or the code of silence in the wrestling business.
Yeah, I'm old school too, so I know about that. But that's a kind of as a watching today's product. That's the only thing that I kind of don't like, because I do like it, the fact that it's more open and people do podcasts and stuff. The wrestlers themselves do it, and the kind of the cat is out the bag, if you like.
Yeah, it's a shame. Well, like Bobby Heenan said, we're just going to have to learn to appreciate pro wrestling from a different level now that it's all out in the open. That some of it's orchestrated. I mean, I hate when people say it's fake.
Yes.
Because you have to be an athlete of supreme ability to be able to do that stuff. If you or I tried it, we would probably die. I know I would. Yes. Probably within the first 15 minutes.
And their schedule as well. I mean, their schedule is grueling.
Yeah, it's incredible, because these guys are taking bump after bump after bump for 49 weeks out of the year, and that's got to take its toll. And it's a rare person to get in that and stay. Guys like Mark Calloway or The Undertaker, and even Hulk Hogan, for that matter, still doing it after all these years. Some of the guys have slowed down, obviously, but and as well they should. And I think you're going to see some more retirements over the next few years, obviously, because
I was going to ask you about that.
Guys are my age or older. I think Mark is. I'll be 50 next year, and I think Mark is 51 or 52.
Do you think like the Undertaker retirement is imminent then? Ed?
You'd almost have to.
Have you met the Undertaker before? Have you ever met Mark?
I have been in the same room with him, but no, I've not.
So just going back to the music era that you've been involved in, didn't you also promote like a comeback for Aerosmith?
Oh, that was a music video called Legendary Child.
Nice.
When my phone rings, particularly on a Friday afternoon as that was, I never know who was going to be on the other end of the line. So I got a call one day from this fellow, and he said, "My name is Casey Tebow, and I just did the new video for Aerosmith." And I'm like, "Oh, that's nice." And he said, "Steven Tyler and we found your demo tape. We want you on this video." And he must have, realized that I thought he was full of it. And he said, he just stopped. He goes, "Are you in front of a computer?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Look me up, Casey Patrick Tebow." It was legitimate. So they sent me a script that they wrote. And I did it, and they liked it, and Steven listened to it, and he said, wait a minute, I want to take this crazy thing over the top, which they wrote this crazy intro to this video, which I thought this song was great.
Yes.
And they had me slated to do 4 more of them, but the album had a soft sell. It was their first music video in 8 years, actually. And they ended up pulling the plug on all the future projects because the album was a slow sell. But so we'll never know, and you'll have to Google Legendary Child music video. We'll never know what the beautiful young Miss Vega had in that little coffin. You have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, do you?
No, not yet. Not until I look it up, Ed. I will look it up, though.
It's fun. Yeah,
I'll do my research on that one. As far as music goes for you, what floats your boat, Ed? What do you like?
Oh boy, I was born much too late. I was very involved. See, back home in Pittsburgh, we're known as the oldies capital of the world, and my radio mentor was a fellow by the name of Porky Chedwick. And Porky was the first white disc jockey on the eastern part of the U.S. to play exclusively rhythm and blues and oldies.
Right.
He never really made a dime off of being a pioneer, but so many of them don't. But he was indeed first, and he basically established a sound in Pittsburgh. He and a couple other disc jockeys who came after him. And there are records that you'll hear in Pittsburgh that are just as popular as national hits that you'll not hear anywhere else but Pittsburgh. And he was one of the people who did that. And I grew up listening to that. We lost Porky about 2 years ago at the age of 96. Wow. And he celebrated his 93rd here on my back porch in Florida. It was his only day ever celebrated out of Pittsburgh. But he was my mentor when I got into the business. And now, of course, he was long past his prime at that point. But we just became dear friends. He was my main cheerleader, I think, throughout my career. Then I had another mentor by the name of Hank Bachman, who was a newsman who I keep in contact with. He's still around, doing a radio show back in Latrobe, in fact. But Pittsburgh was the oldies capital of the world, and that's what I listened to, doo-wop. In fact, when I got into radio, that's what I played. And I was, 15 when I got into radio.
Wow.
Usually people get into voiceovers after they're in radio.
Right.
I do everything ass backwards. So the radio stations, it didn't matter that I knew what I was talking about. I knew the music. If I wanted Bo Diddley on my show, I could call and say, Bo, would you do the show? And he'd say, sure. But it didn't matter. They still wouldn't let me do personal appearances or remote broadcasts because my teenaged face would have compromised the credibility of the radio station.
Really?
So they didn't, a lot of people who didn't know me personally didn't know I was just a kid. So, of course, now the people who hear me doing the TV shows that I narrate over here, the national shows and the WWE and all that stuff, they think, my God, that guy was 60 years old back then. He's got to be older than dirt. So, yeah. But it's been a long time.
So tell me a bit about your own, because I believe you've got your own production studios, facilities. So tell us a bit about your own company.
Well, I actually probably had one of the earliest home recording studios back in the 80s. And now I work out of my home, and it's about a tenth of the size that was. Because
okay.
I don't need a lot. I can run the whole studio on a laptop with all of the modern wizardry. Years ago, I did my first national gig when I was 19, and I was doing promos and voice work for HBO and Cinemax and some other cable companies for a company out of New York, and I would have to put them on reel-to-reel tape.
Right.
And the machine itself probably weighed about 80 pounds that I recorded them on. And you would always have the FedEx or the Purelator or the Airborne Express van in my driveway to pick up these tapes and take them back to New York to have them produced. But now we do everything is digital. The editing software I use is Pro Tools, which I've been using since 1995, and that's really improved immensely in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah.
And it's just, there wasn't any MP3 technology back then, or if it was, you and I couldn't get it. But now we take that for granted. We do everything, via WAV file MP3. We put it up on an FTP server, and radio and TV stations can download it anywhere in the world.
How do you feel about that? Do you think that you kind of miss the old school ways, maybe, or do you like the new school?
To think I fought Pro Tools when Tour Design brought it in. I'm like, no, I'm comfortable with this.
Yes.
I said to Nick Summers not too long ago, I said, there is no way that we could turn out the volume of things that we do if we had to go back to those, 8-track reel-to-reels with the big, thick tape.
Yes.
No way. I mean, I probably turn out 4 or 5 WWE spots for every, 2 I could have done on using that technology. Now, I was good at it. I was good with the analog stuff, but now that digital makes it just so much easier, and I would never go back.
So I want to talk to you a bit about movies. Are you a movie guy, Ed? What kind of movies do you enjoy?
I really don't go to many movies.
Okay.
In fact, I couldn't even tell you the last one that I actually went to see.
Do you like old school movies?
Oh, yeah. I like old music and old movies. Not too long ago, we were watching American movie classics, and there was an old Jimmy Stewart movie.
Nice.
Because Jimmy was, Mr. Stewart was responsible for my first radio job, actually.
Okay. Oh, how did he get involved in that way?
Well, he comes from a place called Indiana, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour outside of Pittsburgh. And
Nice.
I lived in Latrobe, Greensburg area, which is kind of right in between. And I was listening to this radio station, and they were part of the planning committee for a 75th birthday party they were throwing for Mr. Stewart in Indiana. And they were going to unveil a statue and whatnot. And I called this radio station, and I said, would it be possible? See, I was going to be an artist.
Right.
And I used to do portraits of people with colored pencil and pastel because I like the detail.
Yes.
I like to think I've taken that detail and put it in my audio.
Oh, definitely.
Nowadays. But I called and I said, would it be possible for me to do a portrait of Mr. Stewart and present it to him? And she's like, wait a minute, I think I know you. Didn't you do the commercial for this or that? And I said, yeah. She said, well, what station are you with? I said, sweetheart, I'm 15 years old. I'm not with a station. She said, well, you are now. She said, you do that portrait. I'll see to it that you get to meet the Stewarts. So I met him, and we kept in contact. Met him a couple times, actually, after that. And we kept in contact until Mrs. Stewart passed away, and she thought it was just phenomenal that her Jimmy got me my first job in radio. And so that was actually how I got my first job in radio.
That's very cool. I think I've got my grandparents to thank for my old school upbringing, because I know probably more about more about old school movies and actors and stuff that my friends probably would do, and music as well. When you were talking about the old school music as well, I just love that stuff myself.
I am a big Sinatra fan. Bobby Darin,
yes,
Dean Martin, all that stuff I love. And like I say, I'm a 49-year-old guy speaking like a 89-year-old fellow. But I don't care. I don't need to apologize to anyone. Good music,
definitely.
good music.
Definitely.
So my son, who's going to be 9, is even a Sinatra fan. So we can go into a restaurant. We were in an Italian restaurant here in the neighborhood, and they had some music playing, and I said, Zach, who's singing? He said, oh, it's Ella Fitzgerald, the woman behind the bar. She said, how does he know that? I said, it's my son.
Yeah, got to stay proud, Ed.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Frank in concert, maybe? Have you ever seen many concerts?
No.
Do you get a chance?
No, I wish I could have. No, he was kind of on his way out when I was in Pittsburgh. I remember he did it was supposed to be him, Dean Martin, and Sammy.
Right.
And Dean got sick, and they brought Liza Minnelli in. I think it was in Pittsburgh where they went with that organization. And then after that, I think he just kind of slowed down. I never had a chance to see him.
Just thinking about it, just off the top of my head, when we talked about Marc Silk earlier, there's one thing that I was going to ask you. Have you ever been involved in video games? I'm like, why haven't they picked up Ed for video games?
I'd love to do some. I did a video game voice where I played a centurion, a Roman centurion, and for some guy in Greece. And I never saw the video. He never sent me a copy of it. I have no idea where it is or even what it was called. But he paid me, so hey. But I'd love to do. I'd love to do more of that kind of stuff.
So going forward, do you have any projects on the table apart from WWE, or is it just mainly that now that you get involved with?
WWE is certainly the 9 to 5. It's what takes up most of my time.
Yes.
I do other commercials. I narrate 3 TV shows here for NBC-owned properties. They're outdoor shows, hunting shows, actually.
Very cool.
And I've got some movie things in the works through a producer friend of mine, which I can't really talk about them.
Okay.
Yet, but it's going to involve some people you'll know.
Ed, it's been an honor to speak to you, man. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Carlo. My pleasure, buddy. And keep in touch and hope to hear from you again soon.
That has been Ed Weigle. I've been Carl Egger, and you have been listening to Monday Night Carlo.
You've been listening to MNC. All views and opinions expressed by Carlo are all his own and do not represent any other entity.